very good sense. Yeah. Jim, just a note, don't mention your son's name.
No, I know better.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I have to click on this to clear the screen. Okay. I mentioned gravely disabled, and some of you might be unfamiliar with the term. Basically, this is a legal criteria to determine if somebody meets the legal qualifications to be put onto a conservatorship or not. So a person with a serious mental illness cannot, because of their illness, provide for their own food, clothing, or shelter, any one of those. I know that there's a group which is part of the Welfare Institution Code requirement. It's patients' rights, and there's a state, California state level patients' rights website that I looked at one time, and right across the middle of the front page was the definition of gravely disabled, and it was that the person cannot provide for their own food, clothing, or shelter because of their mental illness. But if someone, on the other hand, if someone else can provide for their food, their clothing, or the shelter in a safe manner, then the individual will not be considered gravely disabled, and the LPS conservatorship will not be granted. This is what the public defender was trying to trick me with when they called me and asked, if my son were to be released from his conservatorship, would I then provide the care that he required? And so knowing this is what enabled me to turn around and say, if he's not gravely disabled, and he's, if he's off the conservatorship, then that means he doesn't require my help any longer. So anyway, refer to food, clothing, or shelter to safety or health risk. So if they're eating food out of a garbage can, if they're homeless, or their clothing is just crusted with dirt and filth, that they're sleeping out in the cold, they don't have a place to safely reside, and so forth. These are all different things that are part of the criteria that's going to be looked at to determine if somebody's gravely disabled. Next slide. Shelter. So again, they may not come and live at home. They have no place to live safely. They cannot handle a shelter or board and care safely. So just because they say, well, I can sleep under the freeway overpass down there. Well, but is that safe? I don't believe it is. Food. They lost significant weight from not eating. Paranoia of food, that they're being poisoned, or they're overweight because they have compulsive eating. This is what one of the families had shared with me, and I remembered it, that their loved one that was being 5150 was not eating food, went down to about 80 or 90 pounds, and they were not eating because they thought the family was poisoning them. Or if the individual takes their clothing off. I remember in my 20s, I lived in Santa Monica right down by the beach, and here came this young gal in her 20s it was just stark naked. And I didn't know back then about mental illness, and I was very concerned about her. And I went out and I said, you're in danger of somebody raping you. You really should, go back and get clothed. No, it's a beautiful day. And so, it's only later that when I was introduced to the world of mental illness and understand what bipolar was, that these are symptomologies. And if you have a son that is doing this and the police come, you want to let them know this is not because he's a sexual deviant. This is because he has a bipolar mental health condition, and it's because he is in psychosis that he thinks it's appropriate to take his clothing off. So they're going to get him to a hospital instead of jail. If the individual has no insight into the illness and therefore will not take medication and has no history of has a history of non-compliance. I can't tell you how many families have called me, and I remember one in particular that the mom said, my son was just doing so well. He was, came out of the hospital. He was stabilized. He was able to go back to work. He was making good money. And then he decided, what? I'm just fine. I'm doing great. I don't need this medication anymore. I don't like the side effects or whatever. And he stopped taking it, and he just unraveled. And, unfortunately, needed to get him back into treatment. So these are all indicators that the individual meets criteria of being gravely disabled. which is a requirement of law for somebody to be placed onto a conservatorship. So there are the anti-conservatorship groups out there, and it's because they don't understand these things. It's your loved one's life, their very life is at danger. And as Gail said in the very beginning, having them onto a conservatorship keeps them, they cannot refuse medication, and this keeps them stable and helps them to regain their life. And I remember a story where somebody was actually put back on medication and they gained insight and they started to understand what was going on with their life. They got angry because why did you let me suffer for so long? Why did you let me go without treatment? So these are all indicators that your loved one is meeting criteria and appropriate for you to reach out and try to help them by gaining a conservatorship. Next slide.
Hold on, let me go back just for a second, because I think you kind of skipped over, forgot. On the clothing, there's 3 different ways we can get it. If they take their clothes off at inappropriate times and places, wearing their clothes for excessive periods of time, they smell. But dressing inappropriate for the weather, it's hot, they've got a sweater, sweatshirt, hood, that builds up body heat for heat stroke. That's not very good. Or in the winter, they have a t-shirt, shorts, flip-flops, or barefoot. That too is a health risk. So you can use any of this. And if you're looking at that paper, when you're copying and pasting the history, the symptoms, and gravely disabled, you delete what doesn't apply and add what does. When you get to the gravely disabled part, plagiarize it. It's perfectly fine. Just take out what doesn't apply. But you are most welcome to plagiarize it. Connie Draxler, who used to be head of the Public Guardian's Office, she and I sat down and wrote this together. And everything's applied to safety and health risk. That helps a little bit, it makes it a little bit stronger to get what you need, because to get an LPS conservatorship, remember, they have to be gravely disabled and have a serious mental illness diagnosis. One without the other won't cut it. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Sure. So as a parent, or a brother or sister, if your family member in that case is, other than your being a parent, you're going to want to try to decide, what is the right course or direction to help your loved one to regain their clarity of mind. So there's the recovery model, which is a full service partnership. And basically, there are places like here in Orange County that are funded by FSP, which is a tax on the millionaires. And it provides services for their mental health. They give therapy, they provide doctors and that type of thing. Or, it may be that what their needs are more aimed at AOT, which Linda Boyd will talk about later today, as I mentioned before, which is assisted outpatient treatment, where they're not in a hospital situation. They'll have help from a treatment team that will interface with them and so forth. Or the third, LPS Conservatorship, which is an involuntary treatment because they're not able to make these kind of choices on their own, that they're going to be compliant. So therefore, we need to have a conservatorship in place to make sure they take their medications and get the treatment that they need. Anything else, Gail, you want to throw in on that?
Nope.
Okay,
I think you
next
covered
slide.
that.
Gail, this is yours.
Is that mine? Okay, because I couldn't read the little thing at the side. Okay. When you hospitalize a person, there's 2 ways you can do it. We need to change this because I think it's 988 that you call now rather than 911. Whenever you call, if the person is harm to self or harm to others, and don't wait for them to do the action. If they have the propensity for it, there is a law where they should take them and put them under 5150. And that law is in that LPS paper that you can download from NAMI West Side or NAMI Urban LA. But you call the police, tell them to please, and write this down, send out a crisis intervention team, CIT. They've been trained for mental illness. You don't want just any policeman off the streets, because if they have not been trained for mental illness, they really don't understand it. So you want somebody who has been CIT trained. The police helps to keep the person, if they are a flight risk, from taking off. That's basically the big thing. You can ask them to put them on a 5150, take them to the hospital, not jail, give them that history, symptoms, and gravely disabled information, and they can tell you where they are taking them. That is not HIPAA. Once the person crosses the thresholds to the hospital, now HIPAA laws take place. But that's civil. When the police are taking them to the hospital, they can tell you where it is. Always get the card from the policeman, who you're talking to. And if they've been kind and helpful and, got them in the hospital, it's kind of a good idea. And it's a nice thing to do. Write to their supervisor and to them, complimenting them and telling them how much you appreciate what they did. They don't get very many accolades. And this is one, they don't like being social workers. That's not what they signed up for. But it's one that they really do appreciate. And when the next person calls, they're more kind and more willing to help. Okay, the second thing you can do, instead of calling 911, if the person is gravely disabled, they've lost a lot of weight from not eating, call the 800, and that's on the resource numbers at the end of that LPS paper. Call Access and tell them if they're a flight risk to bring the police, but if not, bring an evaluator to put them in the hospital. Some people get on the bed and they will not get off the bed or leave a room, but be sure when they come, you have access to where they are. Some people have a person in their house and they lock the door to their bedroom and you can't get in it. Well, you should be able to. It's your house. So be sure that that the police will have access to this person. The other thing is write 3 open-ended questions, because when they come to your loved one, they're going to ask them, are you going to hurt anybody? No. You're going to hurt yourself? No. Well, then they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. The police are not psychiatrists and they don't know how to get to what you need. So your open-ended questions would be not a yes and no. It's going to be something like, I understand the FBI have been chasing you or following you. How can we help you with this situation? They're not arguing. They're not telling them that's not true. They're just saying, what can we do to help you? That gets the person talking. Or I understand your dad stole $1 million from you. What can we do to help you with this situation? Those sort of things. Put down 3. So if the first one doesn't cut it, maybe the second and maybe the third, if you have to go that far. And these questions are also good when you go to court and when they're in the hospital, to give it to the doctor to say, these are some of their concerns. That's why you listen to what they say and you don't ever criticize it. Okay. Jim, do you have anything to add?
Right. On number 2, when Gail mentioned that in lieu of dialing 988, you can call the access team. Remember that NAMI Urban Los Angeles is in Los Angeles. But for Orange County, if you go onto the chat room, you'll see that I put in the name of OC Links here in Orange County and the phone number. And you'll want to call OC Links directly. You can no longer call the CAT team directly. So just call OC Links and they're going to ask you what's going on and you just tell them what your needs are. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Hospitalization, when your loved one goes in the hospital, and Louis Levy will be covering a lot of this. So I'm going to go over it kind of quickly. A 5150 is also known as a 3-day hold or 72-hour hold. And it's basically, if the doctor says they go in, they evaluate them, the doctor says, well, we're going to discharge them, that doctor has the right. It does not mean they have to be held for 3 days, but usually they do because they want to do a good evaluation on them. After the 5150, the 3-day hold, if you've given that doctor your history, symptoms, and gravely disabled, most likely they will keep them on a 14-day hold, which is also known as your 5250. Now, on that 14-day hold, within the first 4 working days, but they count weekends now as working days, they will hold a probable cause hearing, or it could be called a certification hearing, whatever they want to call it, right in the hospital. And that is, do we have the probable cause to keep them for the full 14 days, should we decide that's what they need? If your loved one wins that case, then they can leave the hospital at that time. But your history, symptoms, and gravely disabled goes a long way in keeping them in the hospital. All right, after that, and you don't need to remember all these numbers, you will know 5150, you'll hear that so much, is a 5270, also known as a 30-day intensive hold, which means after the 14 days, they can hold them for the full, for another 30 days. But usually what happens in Los Angeles, each county, the laws are the same, but they implement them differently. So after that probable cause hearing, which is the first 4 days of the 14-day hold, if they did not win their case, then if the doctor is going to initiate the LPS conservatorship, that is when they write it up. They don't tend to write it beforehand, because if they win their case, they're released, and all the doctor's done a lot of work for nothing. So if he does write it up, public guardian will come in, they will evaluate, they will do their research, and they will put them on what they call a TCON, or a temporary conservatorship, which is up to 30 days. Within that 30 days, they have to get that LPS conservatorship approved. So the whole thing can be from when they're first hospitalized to final approval of the LPS conservatorship has to be within 47 days. It could be less, but that's pretty much, and usually it does run less, but that's what they do. Okay, and I'm gonna let the rest of that go because I know Lewis will go back over it. It sounds like a lot, but you have 3 days, 14 days, and then 30 days. All right, Jim, anything on that slide?
No, I think we've covered it all.
Okay. How to acquire the LPS? You don't acquire it. There's nothing you do. Now, there's what they call a probable cause, or probate conservatorship that you can actually petition for and go, but that does not cover if you have an attorney who says we're going to do a probate conservatorship and your loved one has a serious mental illness, you've wasted your money. And believe me, the attorneys will take it. They'll go to court, the case is dismissed, because probable cause is for everything that is not mental health. LPS is specific for mental health, schizophrenia, bipolar, chronic depression, schizoid affective. It does cover a couple others, but I've never seen those done. So it is the treating doctor in the hospital or the jail who can initiate the LPS conservatorship. That is not the law, but it is the practice. And the reason why, when they do this work, the hospital's a lockdown, the person can't leave. When the court hearing comes, if the person does not show up in court, then the case is dismissed. So by doing it when they're in the hospital or in jail, they know the person will be transported to court. That's what they do. Now in Los Angeles, we have a pilot project, and basically it's they have a home team The home team will evaluate a homeless person or whatever the case may be, and they can initiate the LPS conservatorship, and they know how to get it through following the guidelines of the law. But we don't, right now, we're not dealing with that. But if you do need that, there are people you can talk to. Lewis can put you right in touch with what you have to do for that, and he'll be talking next. Okay, next slide. If via the hospital, you give your written case to the treating doctor at the hospital, that written case is powerful. It goes a long way on opening doors for you. It's not, you still have to fight, but at least you got those doors open. Request that the doctor initiate the LPS conservatorship. And remember, it's after the probable cause hearing. That is when the doctor should do it. If they're procrastinating, chances are they're going to do it. Now, I'm going to say something. If the hospital tells you, well, this hospital doesn't do LPS conservatorships, and it's a mental health lockdown hospital, yes, they do, and we want to report them. If they say, well, the person has to be in this hospital 3 times before we do the LPS conservatorship. You know, when they're picked up, it's the luck of the draw where they go. You don't know. If they tell you that, you say, could you show me where it says that in the California Welfare and Institutions Code? It's not in there. The law does not say you need X amount of hospitalizations or anything else. Only you need to be gravely disabled and have a serious mental illness. But with that said, if there is a possibility that another program will work for them, then they will want to try that first. And if it doesn't, well, then you're right back to LPS. Okay? Jim?
We're good.
Next.
This is mine.
Yes.
So LPS via jail. Request the treating doctor at the jail to initiate the LPS conservatorship. What you need to know about that before you ask for an LPS conservatorship is how long he's going to be in jail. I mean, if your loved one was arrested for a minor infraction and is probably going to be out of jail in 2 or 3 days, there won't be sufficient time to process that. But if the charges are more serious and you know that they in fact are going to be in jail for a longer period of time, there has to be sufficient time again to do that. So anyway, contact the doctor in the jail and ask them to initiate the LPS conservatorship. And you give them what? Your mental health history. So again, you've done the work, you're prepared. You should always have one hidden away in your trunk of your car, your house, or wherever you're at work, hidden away, and it's always available. Pull it out, provide it to the jail. Request the public defender to ask the mental health liaison to be involved in the case. And another reason you want to reach out to the jail is because of the fact that they do have separate sections in the jail for those that have a mental health condition, and they'll make sure that they are cared for, and if there's known medications and so forth, they can, I believe, provide those. You'd want to ask the public defender to request a jail diversion program, especially if we're looking at something like a felony. They do have a jail diversion program. We don't have time to go into the details, but if the individual follows the rules and course that he has to go on for, I forget the length of time, and I think it's around 2 years, and remains on their medications and that type of thing, then at the end of that time, the judge can waive the charges of whatever crime was committed. And that's what happens in our jail diversion programs. Next slide.
Oh, I'm going to just say something on that mental health liaison. When you take your history, symptoms, and gravely disabled, give it to the public defender. The court liaison number is on that resource paper that you have, and you can call each courthouse should have a mental health liaison that you can talk with. So you want to find out who is the person dealing with that particular courthouse where your loved one's case is going to be heard. Get their name and number, give it to the public defender. In other words, you're doing their work, but it doesn't matter because you want them on board to call that liaison. The liaison opens doors for treatment. Without them, the public defender may or may not work to get them into treatment. He might just, I'm not really worried about this, get this case done and dismissed or throw them in jail, whatever. So you want to be sure to get the court liaison or mental health liaison involved in the case. Okay. That's all. I'm done.
Okay, per the California Welfare and Institution Codes, we oftentimes refer to that as WIC, on Article 5008.2, the law requires that all healthcare providers shall take your information and the historical course of the person must be taken into account for treatment. Again, thank you to Carla Jacobs for bringing our laws into play on this. The court stated that harm may be through neglect or inability to care for oneself. Therefore, if they lack the provisional sense to care for themselves due to their mental illness, then they meet the criteria for a 5150. Okay, anything else, Gail, on that?
No, I think that's it.
Next slide, Araceli. The criteria for the LPS conservatorship, as such, is the LPS conservatorship is California's involuntary mental health treatment for recovery. They must have both a serious mental illness and be gravely disabled. When we say serious mental illness, we're not saying that the individual just is, he becomes depressed from time to time and that type of thing, which is a form of mental health issues, but that they have something such as schizophrenia or a schizoaffective diagnosis. So, these are serious illnesses that that must have both a serious mental illness and gravely disabled. So a person who with no insight into the illness and they're non-compliant with treatment or medication, these are all criteria for qualifying for the conservatorship. Next slide.
No, I'm just going to mention on the serious mental illness, the California Welfare and Institution Code specifically states certain criteria, certain diagnoses. If a person is borderline personality disorder, that is a probate conservatorship. If they're not schizophrenic, schizoid affective, chronic depression, or bipolar, they don't qualify. That is all that qualifies those items. So you have to have those. Anything else is probate conservatorship. Okay. Oh, there it is.
Yep.
And we didn't mention chronic alcoholism and compulsive disorder because we've never seen it just for those.
Well, I will tell you that I remember there was an attorney once that swore that they could get somebody onto conservatorship because of chronic alcoholism, and that just never seems to fly, But it's nonetheless, it's on the slide. But
Yeah.
if they have a problem with alcohol, go ahead, Gail.
Don't mention alcoholism. Don't write it down. Remember, I'm sure because of their mental illness, they are self-medicating. Because not everybody is so well versed on the law like y'all are going to be. And they'll say, oh, this is substance abuse discharge from the hospital. So don't even mention it. The compulsive disorder, that's usually a symptom that goes along with different things. For instance, compulsive eating, they're blowing up like a balloon. That would be part of it. Okay.
All right. So there are different types of conservatorship, and Gail, it's yours. I'm going to beg off. I'm sorry.
I was letting you do it. The LPS conservatorship of the person and of the estate. Most cases you will have it of the person unless you need it of the estate. It is only the treating doctor at the hospital who can initiate the conservatorship of the person. Okay, he has nothing to do with the estate. They don't care what their financial situation is. So it is the treating doctor that initiates it with the public guardian, the conservatorship of the person. And you have certain rights. Your rights basically are to approve or disapprove treatment, placement, and medication. That's it. You're just a guide for them. You're not to do the work. That's what the system does. The public guardian will petition the court for temporary conservatorship, which is that 30 days while they investigate your loved ones in the hospital or in jail, and then they go to court to get the permanent conservatorship. And that's when, if you wish to be the conservator, you can be the conservator. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. The LPS conservatorship of the estate. Now, they're not millionaires, most of them, they just owe debts coming up their ears. So it is when the doctor has initiated the LPS of the person, then you contact the public guardian, find out who's doing the investigation, give them your history, symptoms, and gravely disabled, and let them know what what debts they have. You can run Credit Karma, a credit report, and find out what debts they have. Now, if they have school loans, you can most likely get those waived. For 3 years, they have to make under the minimum amount of money that's allowed for them, poverty level. So, but I would definitely apply for that and try to get that school loan dismissed. And that's something you can do. Debts, court cases, you need the conservatorship of the estate to deal with that. And when you're dealing with debts, you don't have to pay the whole thing off. I mean, you don't pay it off. If they have money, you can negotiate with their creditors, 25 cents on the dollar, 10 cents on the dollar. If they don't have money, let their creditor know, hey, they don't have money. If after 3 years, that judgment will be taken off of their credit report. So don't get too hung up or worried about that stuff. All right, next slide. Probate conservatorships, usually for older people with a mental illness, or younger people if they have autism, brain damage, stroke, any brain illness that's not mental illness. All right, next slide. The conservatee's loss of rights. The right to terminate their rights that are terminated under the LPS conservatorship. They lose the right to refuse medication. And many of you are saying, well, how do I keep them on the medication? Do the class on Sunday. The right that's temporarily terminated is to enter contracts, drive a car. Now, this is federal, to possess a gun and own a gun at that time. Those can come back, but while they are under the conservatorship, they can get the right to enter contracts and drive a car. Remember, we're trying to get them on the road to recovery so that they can have a life again. Don't settle for anything. And basically, sometimes they take a job, they have to write contracts, or they have to drive a car. That's fine. It's not a difficult process to get, and you can get that while they are still under the conservatorship. Only one time did I hear about somebody asking to get the right to possess a gun. And actually, the attorney that handled the case, he won the case. And it was a good case. I mean, it was really, the guy did deserve it, so to get it back. So it was one of those extraordinary cases. All right, next slide. The rights of the conservator. As a conservator, if you choose to be the conservator, you have the right to approve or disapprove treatment, placement, and medication. And I might be kind of getting mundane to you and boring, so I'm going to change my voice to kind of wake you up a little bit. You have the right to work with the doctor to approve or disapprove medications for the conservatee. If they're trying to give you a medication that's bad for your loved one and you know it, you can say no. But now, if you go to the doctor and you say, hey, we're going to be doing all these holistic programs, the doctor will take you to court and have you removed as a conservator. So, treatment, you want to have good people working with your loved one. If they're out of what they call an IMD, an Institute for Mental Disease, and on an outpatient program, if you have a therapist that is kind of wacky, you have the right to remove that therapy. Placement, when they're going to place them in an IMD, go to those facilities and find out, tour them, find out what they do. Talk is cheap, and they'll tell you on the phone, oh, we do this, this, and this. You go there and you go, I don't think so. I mean, they're not doing any treatment or anything. So, and some of the places are not very nice. You have to know your loved one, what they're going to respond to. Medications, learn about medications. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb right now, which I always do. And you never heard it from me. There are a lot of medications that they give for people who have mental health problems. Your loved one has a serious mental illness. If I gave you the medication that I use for my headache, I say give you Tylenol, and you have a migraine, it isn't going to phase your migraine. It is the same with the medications for serious mental illness. So some of the ones that we get a lot of feedback, very positive, Invega is one of the ones I'd say 85 to 90% success with it. And what I like about it, it comes in a pill form. You can try it. It takes 4 to 5 days to work. If it doesn't work, okay. And you don't try it, but you talk to the doctor and you tell the doctor, I've been reading about this. Let's try it for a week and see if I see any difference, I'll let you know. Invega does come as a shot, and the shot is 30 days, and then they have another one for 90 days. I don't suggest you put them on a shot till you know if that medication is going to work for them. Because if it's adverse situation, and some people have that, you don't want them stuck under that for 30 days. That's not the best thing to have. Invega is one, Caplyta, Caplyta. Now I'm hearing from the doctors here in Florida, that's a darn good medication. I haven't had anybody in California under it where the families called back and said it's really great. I don't know of anybody under it. Vraylar, V as in Victor, Raylar. I'm hearing really good things, but I also hear if it doesn't work, hey, it's not working. That's the end of that. But those are 3 that are pretty good. Clozapine is kind of the gold standard because it's still living on its laurels. A lot of people, it doesn't work for. So those are some of the best. Zyprexa, I don't care for. It doesn't really tend to give clarity. After all the time I've done this, I've only had one person that it's worked for in over 20 years. So the probability is not that great. It does have a tendency to blow you up like a balloon. And believe me, our loved ones do not want to be fat. Okay, the Depakote, Ativan, Seroquel. Seroquel helps you sleep. That's about it. Those really don't cut it for our loved ones. But that's my opinion with the feedback that I've gotten from so many people. So take it all with a grain of salt. Take that NAMI class and boy, learn about those medications. All right, Jim, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm typing into the chat room. One of the drug websites, I guess you would say, that you could go to is drugs.com, and they list all the different psychotropic medications. So if you're looking at different medications, you're not sure, how strong a dosage is normal, and you want to know if your loved one is being put on to a really high or a low level, you'll see what the normal levels are. They'll tell you everything about it, what sort of side effects to watch for. It's really a real godsend. And so You can also download the app. Just download the app. It's drugs.com, and it will help to educate you on the medications that your conservatee is taking. Okay, so I just want to leave that tip. That's it.
Thank you. Jim.
Okay, so who should be the conservator? A lot of families are apprehensive for various reasons about being a conservator. They don't know what it's all about or what it involves, how time consuming is it. And so you want to know that if you're the conservator, you're going to be you'll have to set up a payee account with a bank, establish that bank account number with Social Security so they can deposit the monthly checks into it to help pay for the board and cares. And you'll need to be responsible for all of that type of information. It is work, but it's worth it because you'll be able to converse with the doctor and so forth. The downside to that is that a lot of times you'll find that your family member is always nagging you for a new shirt, new pants. I need this. I need a new watch. I need this. I need that. And they'll drive you right up the wall because you're saying, no, 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 you don't need that. No, not now. And so there's a lot of challenges with that. Well, then what do? Well, you know that the public guardian is able to place the person in a state-approved facility. It's less stress for the family. They'll handle all of the finances. They'll deal with all of that. But the negative to allowing the public guardian's office to be the conservator is that there's less involvement with the recovery process. There's no control for medications. And I'm sorry, but the HIPAA laws and privacy laws here in California won't allow them to update you on what's going on with your loved one. Where are they living? And so it's, unless your loved one signs a release of information, you may not know what's going on. So you have to kind of decide, am I going to work with an established kind of relationship with the public guardian and my loved one, and where would that leave me? Or I'll do this on myself. So those are things that you have to consider when you're doing this.
Yeah, I'd like to say something for Los Angeles Public Guardian. We are very blessed in Los Angeles. Louis Leve is in charge of the Public Guardian's office right now. And our public guardians will work with the families a lot, unless their client says, I don't want you talking to my parents at all. Then they kind of have to go along with that. They don't have a big choice, but they will give you a lot of information. They'll work with you. Keep in mind, if you're the conservator, you have one person you're dealing with. If the public guardian's the conservator, they have 50 to 70 people. So emailing them is best. If you talk to them on the phone, and this goes for the doctor too, write down your points, get to them and get off the phone. Don't sit there and just bloviate. They don't have the time, and they will not be talking to you anymore if you do that, because they go, oh, that's that person. That's a windy person. I don't have time. Get straight to your point, ask your question, state whatever they need to know, and be done with it. Okay. But our public guardians are pretty darn good. We're lucky.
Okay, so again, if you're going to be the conservator, you'll have direct contact and a relationship with the doctor. You can reject inappropriate treatment facilities, medications, and treatment places. Also, I just want to bring up too, because I think it can be skipped. If your loved one is on a conservatorship and they're placed into a mental health facility of any nature, before that facility can transport them to any other facility, you have the right as a conservator to inspect the facility to see if it meets their needs, actually. But again, those are things that you have to look at. Do I have the time to do that? Am I able to go down and sit at Social Security office if necessary? Can I get time away from the work to do that? So the negative is, as I mentioned earlier, the conservator tries to manipulate you. They try to get you to do all sorts of things or to buy all kinds of things, and it's a lot to deal with sometimes. Also, the hospital will try to push you around and discharge the patient to a facility not appropriate for the level of care or treatment needed for your loved one's recovery. I remember one of our local hospitals here in Orange County. I not only told them that our son was on a conservatorship, I personally in person handed the paperwork to their emergency room director, and he transferred our son out of the county to another hospital that was known to be horrible. And I had to contact the hospital and said, oh, guess what? You violated the law. You did not allow me to inspect the facility. In this case, I'm very aware of it. And I just basically told them what I just told you, is that that facility was not appropriate, and they can't just move your conservatee without your knowledge or awareness first. So again, these are all kinds of things that you want to think about. What are the positives? What are the negatives? Am I going to deal with this hospital? It says, well, I'm going to discharge him today if you don't get him out of here and find a place to go. You have to deal with all those kinds of things. So you have to be prepared. Am I prepared to deal with that? Next slide.
Hold on, Jim, you didn't finish your story. Jim
Oh,
got
Jim.
his son back to that hospital.
I did. I basically told them that they had to send an ambulance or pick him up and take him back because they put him into a facility that was inappropriate for his level of care. It did not meet his needs. And therefore, they violated the law. And I expect them to do that today, kind of a thing. And it took a couple of days, but they, in fact, transported him back to their own hospital. And they said, oh, thank you so much for educating us. And I thought, come on, you just assumed I didn't know enough. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Anyway, what is the normal LPS process? Your loved one is picked up on a 5150. They're picked up and transported to the hospital. They're going to be assessed during a 72-hour hold. In that 72 hours, they're going to determine whether he needs to be held longer or discharged. If he needs to be held longer, they're going to, in fact, put him on the next 14-day hold. During that time, again, you've asked that a TCON be initiated and so forth. And they're going to need to do that by the 4th day of the 14-day hold to at least start the process of applying for it. And again, at the end of that 14-day hold, if they're still in that mental frame of mind and so forth, that they need to be held longer and it's appropriate to continue forward in trying to get him or her onto a conservatorship, they will start the TCON within that 30-day hold. And that gives them sufficient time to get them into the courtroom to have a hearing. So as I said, within 14 days of the 14-day hold, a probable cause hearing occurs, and they'll have a legal hearing, and if they come to a conclusion that he meets criteria, then that allows the hospital to keep them for those 14 days. And after the probable cause, the doctor can initiate the LPS with the public guardian's office. Again, put him on or her onto a 30-day hold, which is referred to as a TCON. Sometimes parents, upon the 5150 portion, will request for a TCON. They'll say, what's a TCON? The hospital knows what a TCON is. But I always recommend that you ask for a conservatorship. And so an LPS hearing would take place during those 30-day holds. And that's really kind of how it flows in terms of time and duration and what kind of goes on within those time periods. Next slide.
Jim, we need to speed this up. Our time is at the end.
I can speed it up as fast as we want to go.
Go for it.
During a court hearing, the patient's assigned a public defender. They can request a court hearing where the judge will decide whether they're placed onto conservatorship or put onto a jury trial and let the jury decide. Next slide. The Mental Health Court in Los Angeles, Department 103. Gail, is this a current address? Is that
No, it's not. It's been moved to Norwalk, and we didn't change the slide, but it has been changed on that LPS paper. Hollywood holds the hearings for, I'm trying to think, for other things, but the LPS
Competency,
It's competency, Gail.
competence. Oh,
Rick
okay, thank
Reese,
you, thank you.
Rick's. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Norwalk, and we need to change this slide. Okay, next one.
So
After, oh,
it is
you
you.
want me to do it?
Nope.
Okay, after the LPS is granted, the hospital should hold the patient until a proper facility becomes available. They really don't like doing that, because when they put down that the patient needs a subacute care, which is an IMD, it stands for Institute for Mental Illness. They're pretty good. A lot of them are very good. Some I wouldn't. I just kind of shrug my shoulders at. But it's where the person goes. It's a lockdown initially, and they give them a lot of therapy, treatment programs, all sorts of things. As you see your loved one get well, they'll let you take them out for lunch. They'll let you take them on outings. They'll take them on outings. So until they're trying to get them back in the community. From there, this is generally speaking. They can go to a step down. Now they can skip any one of these processes, or to a board and care. Board and cares, you've got to look at those. Some are horrid. If you pay a little bit of extra money for them to be in a board and care, in a nicer one, be sure you pay it through CalAble, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. Sober living, that's another possibility, or outpatient treatment. Those are all possibilities. But the hospital should hold the patient until a proper treatment facility is available. And they should request the intensive care division evaluate the person for where they should be placed. You should not have to run around and look for where am I going to put them? That's not your responsibility. That is the Department of Mental Health. Okay, next slide. Suggestions for recovery. Remember what your loved one was like prior to the illness. Seek that level of recovery. Get your old photo album to remember what they were like. And don't settle. When a doctor says, oh, that's the best you're going to get another doctor. Medications, be familiar with all their meds. If you have a smorgasbord of medication, try to figure out which one's working. You won't be able to. You want one medication that works the best for them at whatever level. Then if you have to add something, you do. Those medications are very important. Therapy, cognitive therapy is very important. And they do a lot of this online. And let me tell you, I didn't think patients would like it. They love it. Addiction treatment, if they have substance abuse problems, you definitely want that. So even if they've been in an IMD and they come out and gee, they're doing great, keep these programs going. Keep the therapy and the substance abuse programs going. Keep working with them so that they stay on the road to recovery. Next slide. Next, Araceli, thank you. Take that free family to family class. Was 12. I think they've cut it down to 8, which they could have done that easily. NAMI Urban LA offers a free family to family class for a class for people who are under the conservatorship. And that's the class tomorrow. Join NAMI, get involved, and talk about getting involved. Jim, I'm going to give you 1 second to tell. What we want people to do is contact your board of supervisors and tell them, I'm going to let Jim tell you what you want to tell them. Their numbers and their emails are on that resource section of the LPS paper that you're going to download and read when you have insomnia. Jim, tell them what you need.
We want our supervisors to know that we need drug-free zones around our board and cares, around our mental health hospitals, any mental health facility, because our loved ones are being preyed upon by those individuals that sell drugs. And even if it's just a small amount of drugs that they're selling, those small amount of drugs will cause your loved one to decompensate, end up in long-term treatment, or perhaps cause them to go forward and commit a crime and be charged with serious offenses. It requires an enormous amount of monies for our counties across the state of California to pay for all of that. It just goes on and on and on. And it's those that are dealing with a mental illness are very vulnerable, and especially if they're co-occurring. And they are just so susceptible to those people that are offering them, whether it's pot. Even pot can cause psychosis with these individuals and their meds.
Jim, we have to go on. Just tell that board of supervisor you want to support drug-free zones for any place that has mental illness.
We're working on some legislative issues, and we need the support. They need to.
Yes, we do. We need your advocacy. All right, Jim?
You want to keep a sense of humor. Nothing is more devastating to see somebody that you love so deeply suffer from a mental health condition. So you obviously want, I'm missing the part about the journal, I'm sorry, but you want to keep a complete journal of what medications they're on. Anytime that you call anyone, whether it's Social Security or the doctor, or keep a log, what date, what time, who did you talk to, what medications are they on, when were they changed. You want all of that information to be kept at hand. It's critically important, but also don't let this pull you under, because you need to stay strong yourself in order to best help your loved ones. So keep a sense of humor, keep your chin above the water, and move forward.
Linda, you wanted to say something? Linda Boyd?
No, I was just talking about the Hollywood court, and then I just answered someone in the chat. That's all.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
No, it's just, we're at the end of our presentation. We've all seen people out there that are homeless. It's really a big news item that's no longer news. But I just so appreciate what's going on with the new mayor in Los Angeles, who's really involved in homelessness and mental health needs. She really has her finger on the pulse of what's going on in the Los Angeles area, and is just doing everything she can. It's the bureaucracies that get in the way, and she knows what those hiccups are, and she's out there to make a difference. Just know that the person you see that's out there homeless, or they're holding a sign, this is somebody's loved one. This is their dad or their son or their daughter. They may not have seen them for years. And, we just need to do what we can for those that are suffering out there in a homeless situation. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Again, I'm my brother's keeper. And what we do in these classes for NAMI Urban Los Angeles and our presentations requires a bit of help and so forth and over time. And if you are in a position to afford to contribute or make a donation to NAMI Urban Los Angeles, you can find their website as well. Just Google it in. But you can donate to that, and make sure that when you donate that you want to earmark that for the conservatorship classes, and that helps to pay for that. So this donation is for LPS conservatorship programs, and that will help these to continue on. So again, thank you for coming today. And I think is that the last slide, Nasrelli?
It should be pretty close. Questions. Okay. Well, can we do the questions after Louis does his presentation and Linda? And I just want to say, if anybody has any questions, personal questions or problems, you're more than welcome to call Jim or myself, but preferably call me when you're having your coffee in the morning, not at night, because I am East Coast. I'm 3 hours ahead of y'all. Okay, Louis? Is he with us?
I am here, Gail. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you, Jim and Gail, for that very thorough presentation.
Thank you for being with us. We appreciate this.
Let me start my video. I may not be able to start on video because my connection gets a little glitchy, but let's try. Araceli, I think that's probably something.
Were you able to right now?
No, something's going on.
Here, I think if I request, I think that's what I did with Gail.
Well, we're a bit behind schedule, Araceli. If we can just get going on it, I'm okay with that. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Luis Leiva. I'm the acting deputy director at the Office of the Public Guardian. Just before I get started, I want to be very clear that some of the processes that I will be discussing today apply only to LA County, although some of the laws under the Welfare and Institutions Code is state law. The way they are applied can vary from county to county. Again, some of the issues that I will be discussing today and some of the processes that I will be discussing today apply to LA County as I know them, okay? All right, so today's training objectives are, we're gonna provide an overview of the Office of the Public Guardian. We'll be providing an overview of the conservatorship, the intent, the purpose, and the types of conservatorships that are available. We will discuss conservatorship services available, which are inpatient, outpatient referrals, and public guardian as the conservator. We'll also briefly discuss forensic cases. Those are our justice involved. Clients who are currently incompetent to stand trial and may be referred by the mental health court for possible conservatorship, okay? And those are defined under two general statutes. That's your felony incompetence to stand trial and your misdemeanor incompetence to stand trial. And the penal codes apply differently depending on whether they're facing felony or misdemeanor charges. And we'll discuss that briefly. We'll also talk about the new enacted CARE Act. This is something that the governor has been pushing for quite a while. This is the onset of CARE Court, which I'm happy to say was originally planned for LA to become part of the CARE Court, not until 2024. At the beginning of this year, we were informed that the county and along with the state are planning to enact CARE Court before the end of this year. Okay, so that's another layer of assistance that's coming our way to help with our mentally ill population. Okay, next slide. Okay, the Office of the Public Guardian is the designated county conservatorship investigator for all LPS cases. Okay, that is by the code. Okay, so all LPS conservatorship referrals are investigated by the Public Guardian's Office. There is no other entity that has the responsibility to investigate LPS conservatorships other than the Public Guardian. Okay. All referrals for LPS are submitted to the Public Guardian, and only Public Guardian can submit the initial petition for conservatorship. Okay. Referrals can be accepted or rejected by the Public Guardian. Some of the elements by which a referral may be rejected is that the person being referred is not a county resident. Okay, the referral itself lacks the evidence of grave disability. At times, we do unfortunately get referrals that are incomplete, or the referral is not legible. Unfortunately, some of the doctors who are so busy don't have the best writing. If the judge cannot read it, the court are likely to reject that referral. Okay. There's also a 5-day notice requirement that goes with the referral. That 5-day notice requirement is basically a notice to the proposed conservatee that outlines their rights, okay? And that notice has to be served prior to us accepting the referral, okay? That is a local rule here in LA County. I'm not certain how other counties apply that. However, there is a 5-day notice requirement to the proposed conservatee, okay? All right. Next slide. Okay, what is a conservatorship? It is a court proceeding to appoint a legally responsible person for somebody who is unable to provide for her personal needs or property manage his or her finances, okay? So again, the three types of conservatorships under the code are LPS, which would be, it's gonna be our main focus of this training. There's probate conservatorship that is generally for your older demented adults with major neurocognitive disorders or the developmentally disabled, okay? The state recently enacted a housing conservatorship that's currently not available in LA County. The counties that chose to participate in the housing conservatorship programs are, as I understand it, San Francisco and I want to say Sacramento. Okay. Next slide. Okay, conservatorship is a civil proceeding requiring proof of need and attendance by involved persons. Okay, so this is a major challenge for us to be able to successfully conserve those who need it the most. Okay, this is having somebody present in court is a requirement under the law. Okay, and as Gail had mentioned earlier in her presentation, it makes it a lot more convenient for us to get people involved in the court process if they are currently referred by the designated hospitals, okay? Or if the individual is still in custody pending charges, okay? That just allows us to get them to court a lot easier than somebody who's out in the community, all right? Next slide. Okay, it is very important to understand what the intent of the LPS laws were, okay? So the LPS laws were written by the three legislators who are Lantham and Petrus in short. That is, and the intent of the law was to end the inappropriate, indefinite, and involuntary commitment of individuals. Okay, prior to the LPS law, there was no due process rights, and the treatment of the mentally ill was very poor. This is what enacted the three legislators to look into the establishment of laws that protected their due rights. Okay, the LPS law also provided for the prompt evaluation and treatment of the mentally ill. The intent was to provide for individualized treatment, supervision, and placement, to safeguard individual rights through judicial review, to provide services in the least restrictive setting. Okay, so that's a very key point there, the least restrictive setting based on their clinical needs. Okay, part of our investigation at the Public Guardian's Office requires us to have ongoing conversations with the clinical teams to determine what is the least restrictive setting to meet the client's needs. Okay, just because somebody's conserved doesn't necessarily mean that their needs are going to be met at the highest level of care, which is a locked facility. Okay, we have an obligation to figure out whether or not they could potentially go to a less restrictive setting and still their needs being met at that particular setting. Okay, the LPS law also establishes procedures for involuntary treatment. Okay, just one caveat to this: the LPS law is a byproduct of the civil rights movement. Okay, it made involuntary treatment more restrictive and provided the court oversight and granted, again, the due process rights to these individuals. Okay. Okay, what are the effects of conservatorship? Okay, it shifts the responsibility for making personal care and financial decisions from the client to the conservator. It imposes upon the client significant limitations on his or her civil rights, such as where to live, the mental health treatment they can accept or refuse, the execution of contracts, the management of their personal finances, and in some cases, physical health decisions. Okay? However, despite these restrictions, conservatorship may provide the best guarantee of protection of the client's interests. Okay. Okay, LPS conservatorships. LPS inpatient conservatorship, the LPS inpatient conservatorship process. The process starts generally with a client being placed into a designated facility, which are acute psychiatric facilities, on a 72-hour hold for evaluation. Okay, that is, again, your Welfare and Institutions Code 5150. Next slide, Araceli. Okay, at that 72-hour hold period, the treatment team at that acute facility is going to determine whether or not the client can be stabilized enough so that they can return safely to the community. Okay. If unable to stabilize them successfully, the treatment team is able to enact the 14-day hold, which is under the Welfare and Institutions Code known as the 5250. Around the 14-day hold, generally, the treating doctors will determine whether or not that individual may require referral for LPS conservatorship. Okay. Generally, they tried medications, other stabilization treatment plans that have not proven to be effective. Okay. However, if at the 14-day hold, they can also determine if that person needs a longer period of stabilization. And at that point, they'll enact the 30-day intensive hold, okay, which is known as the 5270. Important note is that not all counties authorize the use of this hold. Okay, here in LA County, it is used, and it is used also as a tool to potentially not refer individuals for conservatorship. Okay, it gives the hospitals an extended period to where they can treat individuals and potentially avoid having to refer them for conservatorship. Okay. If no intensive hold, then a temporary conservatorship must be in place by the end of the 14-day hold. Meaning, what that means is that we have 47 days that the code allows to involuntarily hold somebody, okay? If the case is referred to the public guardian for investigation, at that time, we will forward that referral once accepted to our county council, who will petition the mental health court to establish the TCON that Gail and Jim were referring to earlier, okay? That TCON allows us for 30 days of investigation, okay? Unfortunately, that TCON, once in place, does not give us an additional 30 days beyond the 47-day hold period, okay? Meaning, if we get a TCON while the patient is already on the 30-day hold, we need to investigate that case and put that case in front of the mental health court judge prior to the end of the 47th day of the, once you add the 3-day holds, okay? I know it's a little convoluted, but again, the TCON does not buy us an additional 30 days, okay? That individual has a right to have their hearing prior to the end of the 47th day of being held involuntarily, okay? So that's why it is critical for the public guardian to receive referrals well into the 14 or at the beginning of the 30-day hold, okay? Because the investigations that we need to conduct can be rather extensive, and we would like to have as much time as possible prior to the 47-day expiring, okay? All right, so unfortunately, there's been some occasions where we'd have to refuse referrals because there's only 10 days left to that 47-day period, right? So unfortunately, that doesn't allow us enough time so that all the moving parts that are required in preparing the petition, conducting the investigation, we need I wouldn't say a significant amount of time, but we need more than 10 days to complete all those factors that need to be done, okay? So referrals for LPS investigation are usually sent at the end of the 14-day hold, or again, at the very beginning of the 30-day hold. Deadlines for submission of referrals are required to meet the notice requirements, okay? Next slide. Okay. LPS inpatient conservatorships are for persons with serious mental illness who require involuntary treatment, okay? As Jim had indicated previously, there's a various number of cases that an individual may be dealing with a mental health illness. The ones that are referred to us are generally individuals who are your most acute individuals at the hospitals, okay? That is it's for the purpose of establishing the conservatorship, the court's going to want to know that that person's grave disability or their inability to care for themselves is directly related to their mental health diagnosis, okay? Only designated doctors and facilities can initiate LPS referrals. Why is that? Because when that case gets to court, that doctor is going to be required to testify in front of the court, okay? And again, there are 40 plus designated facilities in Los Angeles County, and we also regularly get referrals from the jails, okay? Next slide. Okay, LPS inpatient conservatorships, there is due process during involuntary holds, okay? Prior to the case being referred to the public guardian, the patient has a right to a certification hearing, okay? These hearings are held at the facility, okay? And the legal basis for those is there enough probable cause that the patient is a danger to others, a danger to self, or gravely disabled, okay? So at every hold, the 14-day and the 30-day hold, the patient has a right to request a certification hearing so that and the goal of the patient is so that that hold he can be released from the hold, okay? If at the time we already have a referral pending and that individual wins their certification hearing at the hospital, that referral for conservatorship automatically stops, okay? That patient has been determined to no longer be a danger to others, a danger to self, or gravely disabled, and is released from the hospital, okay? During the certification hearing, the patient is represented by patient's rights, and the hospital personnel is the one presenting the evidence that the individual is required to remain on the hold, okay? Okay, Reese hearings. Reese hearings are held when an individual who's on a hold is refusing medication, okay? They're also known as the medication Reese hearings. And there can also be a Reese hearing for medication during the course of once the TCON has already been established, okay? Just because somebody's on a hold or on a TCON doesn't necessarily mean that the hospitals or the public guardian has authority to involuntarily medicate that individual, okay? If an individual who's already on a TCON is refusing medication, the treatment team will complete a Reese medication application, and we'll present that to the court for immediate hearing so that the court can weigh in and grant the Reese hearing to involuntarily medicate, okay? Okay, next slide. Okay, what is grave disability? Grave disability is defined by Welfare and Institutions Code 5008, and it is defined as the inability to provide for food, clothing, or shelter due to the mental disorder or impairment by chronic alcoholism, okay? Although the code does allow for the conservatorship of those who are chronically alcoholics, it is it is very difficult to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt for somebody who has that set of condition. Okay. And as far as grave disability, again, the important piece of evidence that we need to prove to the court is that that individual's grave disability is as a result of their mental disorder. Okay. There are many socioeconomic reasons why individuals can be homeless. For the purpose of establishing the conservatorship, again, our investigators need to key in on that person's inability to provide for their food, clothing, or shelter because of their mental health condition. All right. And again, alcoholism is rarely pursued as a primary diagnosis due to the lack of treatment facilities. All right. The person is unwilling or incapable of accepting voluntary treatment. If throughout the course of us investigating the case, if that individual turns around and says, I'm accepting of treatment, the hospital will drop the case for conservatorship, okay? And it does happen from time to time, not often, but there's times where within the 47 days, somebody is able to be stabilized enough where they gain the insight to know that they need treatment. So at that point, the process to establish the conservatorship may come to an end. Okay. Next slide. Public guardian is appointed temporary conservatorship of person only for up to 30 days during that TCON period, all right? We do not have powers over the estate during that 30-day period. Again, we use that 30-day period to conduct our investigation. We'll review the medical charts. We'll conduct a LexisNexis search for possible relatives. We'll consult with the treatment staff. We'll interview family, friends, and significant others. We're required to conduct a face-to-face interview with the proposed conservatee. And we are also required to submit a comprehensive report with our recommendations to the court, all right? So again, that 30-day period requires us to perform all these elements, and that is why we would prefer that the hospitals refer these cases to our office. The sooner the better, ideally within that 14-day period hold, okay? Next slide. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the LPS Outpatient Conservatorship Program. All right, Gail had mentioned the home team. This was a pilot program that was started, I want to say about 2 years ago, and it is intensive outreach. It requires for intensive outreach and engagement for the chronically homeless. Okay, they outreach to those that are chronically gravely disabled. They're unable to live safely in the community, and they have refused all services offered to them. Okay. The goal of the outpatient conservatorship program through the home team is to avoid acute hospitalization unless it is required for possible stabilization or to address some medical emergency or medical condition that require immediate attention, okay? Most of our home team clients will eventually be placed in the community with FSP services, all right? One of the key components of our home team referrals is that the home team has to prove that they have engaged with that individual for a significant amount of time, offering them services, offering them street medication, so on and so forth. So that if we do resort to having to conserve them, they can prove in court that they have tried to provide options to that individual, and because of their mental health condition, they've refused those options, okay? All right. Next slide. Okay, so Welfare and Institutions Code 5008 and WIC Code 5352 indicate that a professional person may recommend conservatorship without the person being in an inpatient facility if both of the following are true. The professional person has examined and evaluated the person and determined that he or she is gravely disabled. So again, that is how the home team is able to prove their cases in court. Okay, they've shown that they can demonstrate that they've engaged with that individual for a number of months, and that individual again has refused whatever services are provided to them. All right. The professional person has determined that a future examination on an inpatient basis is not necessary for a determination that the person is GD, all right, or gravely disabled. Again, our home team have generally offer housing, street medication, psychotropic medication, and that individual has refused. And at that point, there is no other option but to consider conserving that individual. Okay. Next slide. At that point, the home team will then submit the application for LPS conservatorship. They'll submit the referral to our office and we'll conduct our investigation. Our investigator, we've established a process where the assigned investigator will go out with the home team and interview that individual wherever they may be. Okay, maybe a homeless encampment, under a bridge, wherever that individual is, we will go out with the home team and conduct our face-to-face interview with them. Okay. One of the challenges that we have with investigating those type of cases is that medical records may be minimal, right? So that also that is why we also will require the home team to build a case where they've engaged with that individual for several months. Okay. That's part of the engagement process by the home team, is to build a medical foundation to prove our case in court. Okay. Okay. Generally, at that point, we will decide if public guardian will require a temporary conservatorship, depending on the circumstance of each case. Okay. If we see that individual will require is requiring acute medical stabilization, then we would likely submit for a temporary conservatorship in an effort to get them hospitalized. Okay. Next slide. Okay, more on our home team. The use of TCOM powers to initiate placement in least restrictive setting to meet their needs. Okay, so again, if we decide that a temporary conservatorship is needed, it is mainly because that individual can no longer safely remain out in the community. Okay. The home team will use the hospitals for limited purposes. And again, it's for acute stabilization, medical clearance, and possible detoxification of substances. Okay. Our home team will also seek the temporary conservatorship release for those that remain medication noncompliance. The testimony component, again, for our home team clients, we'll use the home team psychiatrists and home team members in order to provide the testimony at the time of the hearing. Okay. Next slide. Okay, once the permanent conservatorship is established, we will work with the home team to arrange for placements, establish benefits, and after the investigation concludes and we're formally appointed by the court, that case gets transferred for ongoing case management to one of our caseload deputies. Okay. And this is the same process by which a case moves from the investigation phase. Once we're appointed, most of our cases will then move from our investigation unit to our caseload units for ongoing management of that case. All right. If the conservatorship is denied, home team will continue to provide outreach and engagement. And if possibly they'll re-refer the case if circumstances change, okay? These home team cases can be rather difficult because, again, the engagement and history of that individual can be difficult to demonstrate the actual history of that individual and the need of that individual being gravely disabled, right? So our home teams are getting very good at building a case and providing the necessary testimony to successfully conserve our homeless population, okay, that require it. Okay. Okay, conservatorship as the last resort. A conservatorship removes many of the rights that we take for granted, where we live, what mental or physical health care to receive or accept, or the ability to handle our own finances. Before a conservatorship is established, all viable and suitable alternatives to conservatorship must be investigated and or tried before public guardian can petition or recommend becoming conservator. Okay, again, conservatorship is the last resort. All right, and because of the civil rights, the removal of an individual rights is held to a higher standard with the court. That is why our conservatorship cases in the mental health court require the highest burden to prove, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, that is the same burden to prove as in a criminal case, because again, there's a component involved here where the individual may be required to be held involuntarily in a treatment facility, or may be required to be involuntarily medicated. And that is why the standard remains high, okay? And again, by code, we are required to consider all suitable alternatives to conservatorship. So what are those alternatives to conservatorship? The individual is not gravely disabled, okay? That individual may be able to avail themselves to food, clothing, or shelter, and is able to articulate a suitable plan for self-care, okay? In some of these cases, the individual may already have been stabilized for 47 days prior to us being in front of the judge. In those 47 days, they may be able to establish some sort of stabilization where they gain the wherewithal to make a case for themselves to where they no longer need to be conserved, okay? They're able to articulate a plan where they're going to provide for those three elements, okay? Okay. Another alternative is third-party assistance, and Jim touched on this when he spoke about it. An individual or entity will provide clothing, food, clothing, and shelter, and proposed conservatee will accept that assistance, okay? So if a family member is willing to pick them up from the hospital and take them home, that's third-party assistance, all right? As long as that individual has the insight to know they need to accept that assistance for their well-being, okay? Another alternative to conservatorship is voluntary treatment. They're willing to accept treatment voluntarily as we discussed earlier, okay? Placements at a state, there are several families who become private conservator and want to take their loved ones to a facility treatment out of state. The powers granted through the conservatorship here locally are only good in California, okay? All right. If the patient goes AWOL, we will terminate if the individual is not found prior to 60 days, okay? And we'll consider all factors related to that AWOL case where we may have to keep the case open for a longer period of time, okay? Okay, next slide. And as mentioned earlier, psychiatric treatment is needed to establish psychiatric testimony, is needed to establish grave disability. All right. The legal burden of proof, as mentioned earlier, is beyond a reasonable doubt. That was established by case law. And again, it's due to the invasiveness of what the LPS conservatorship will entail if a person is conserved. Next slide. Okay, once appointed by the Los Angeles County Superior Court as the conservator over a person and or of the estate, the office of the public guardian will manage the daily life and or financial affairs of the conservatee due to their limitations. Okay, those decisions can be to authorize placement, authorize medication, apply for benefits, manage, possibly collect any bank accounts that they may have to pay for their care. It also may involve the sale of property. Basically, we need to step into that individual's shoes and manage whatever affairs they had prior to being conserved. Okay. If they were part of any litigation, they were going through a divorce, we would pick up on that, on those issues as well. Okay. Next slide. Okay, and once conserved, placement in an appropriate level of care that meets the client's needs and addresses their condition that causes the grave disability. Okay, so again, LPS conservatorship grants us powers solely for the treatment, to make decisions over the treatment of their psychiatric condition. Okay, if they have any other medical needs that need to be addressed, the LPS powers do not grant the conservator authority to manage their medical issues. And that may require us to go back to court to seek additional authorizations from the court to deal with those medical conditions, okay? So generally, an individual may go into a 24/7 supervision facility that allows for the administration of their medication and provides for their food, clothing, and shelter, okay? Once the court grants the conservatorship, they'll grant the powers 4, 5, and 6, which is usually addresses placement, involuntary medication, and other authorities that are granted through the conservatorship. Again, only to treat their psychiatric only to make decisions over their psychiatric treatment. Okay. Authorization of mental health treatment, including psychiatric medication, that's covered by powers 8 and powers 8A. All right. The LPS court may give you limited medical consent authority under power 12, and that is only for non-intrusive medical care, okay? Anything related to the care of a chronic medical condition, the court may allow for power 12, but anything that's invasive or anything that generally pierces through the skin will require the conservator to go back to the court to ask for a specific authorization for that medical procedure, okay? Okay, if the conservator is appointed over estate, estate powers are covered under power 11 and power 13, and that allows for the contracting for placement to sign the admissions agreements. It allows for the conservator to apply for all financial entitlements, benefits, SSI, VA pensions, whatever the conservatee is entitled to, the conservator has an obligation to apply for all those benefits, okay? The estate powers also allow the conservator to pay for bills and provide for personal needs, all right? And as mentioned earlier, the conservator has an obligation to marshal all of the client's assets if necessary to pay for their care. Okay, so the court expects that the conservator will protect the estate of the client if the client has an interest in a piece of real property, owns a vehicle, has bank accounts, investment accounts, the conservator is required to manage those once the court grants them estate powers. Okay. What is the duration of the conservatorship? All LPS conservatorship lasts only for 1 year, but can be renewed after a year. Okay. So if my loved one is conserved today, a year from now, there's going to be another hearing where I, as the conservator, along with their treating doctor, need to demonstrate to the court that that individual or my loved one remains gravely disabled and needs to remain on the conservatorship. Okay. Prior to the expiration of the conservatorship, the treating doctor will evaluate for the need of reappointment of the conservatorship. And that treating doctor generally makes that determination and completes what's called a physician's declaration. And that is the evidence that the court is looking at in order to grant the reappointment of that case. Okay. If the doctor recommends for the continuation of the conservatorship, county council will petition for the reappointment on behalf of the public guardian if we are the appointed conservator. Okay. If the conservator is a loved one or a private conservator, then the responsibility falls to that private conservator to file the necessary paperwork themselves. Okay. Next slide. Okay, conservatorship termination. The public guardian will request to terminate the conservatorship when the client is found by the treating psychiatrist or the public guardian to no longer be gravely disabled. Okay. Generally, we take a look at our board and care cases where an individual remains medication compliant, has not had any issues requiring acute stabilization. We'll start making a determination, and in discussions with that doctor or their FSP service, whether or not that individual needs to remain on conservatorship. Again, the goal for conservatorship is to allow for that individual to gain their autonomy back to be able to manage their condition independently, okay, and return to the community safely. All right. So conservatorships are not forever, and it all depends on the circumstance of each case. All right. Okay, we will also seek to terminate the case if the client's whereabouts remain unknown for 60 days. Unfortunately, we do have cases where an individual may be recommended for an open setting, and the individual leaves that setting and is nowhere to be found. We generally will file a missing persons report with the police, and we'll keep the case open for 60 days in hopes that that individual is found and we're able to consider a possible higher level of care. Okay. Okay, for private conservators, if a reappointment is not filed, the conservatorship will terminate by operation of law. Okay. So again, if I conserve my loved one today, a year from now, the powers granted to the court will terminate by operation of law unless I took the actions necessary to submit the reappointment paperwork. Okay. Upon conservatorship termination, the public guardian or private conservator no longer has the legal authority to act on behalf of the former conservatee. All right. So generally what happens there is there's a notice that goes to Social Security letting them know we no longer have authority, that the court terminated the case. And at that point, that the client will be allowed to manage their own benefits. Okay. Okay, forensic cases. as indicated previously, we do receive referrals from the court or correctional house services. Generally, there are statutory requirements as to when the public guardian is to be involved. And as I mentioned earlier, it all depends on whether that individual is facing felony or misdemeanor charges, okay? There are several diversion programs that Jim touched on earlier as well that will allow for that individual to be diverted out of the criminal justice courts if they voluntarily accept services from various agencies, one being the Office of Diversion and Reentry. There's also assisted outpatient treatment, which Linda Boyd will be talking about after my presentation. There's also rapid diversion in some of the criminal cases. And there's court linkages and court liaisons that may present that defendant with several options to divert their cases out of the criminal justice system, okay? Next slide. Okay, SB 317, those are your misdemeanor incompetence to stand trial. There's been a declaration of doubt at the criminal court. Okay, once the public defender, the district attorney, or the criminal court judge determines that that individual cannot help in their own defense, they raise a doubt as to their competency. That defendant is generally assessed by a mental health clinician who determines whether or not that individual is able to help in their own defense and understands the criminal proceedings against them. Okay, at that point, the judge may ask for a transfer of the case to the mental health court. These competency cases are currently being heard at the Hollywood Mental Health Court, okay? The law does allow for a restoration to competency period for the felony cases, but it no longer allows, it took that element out of the misdemeanor cases, okay? So prior to about 4 or 5 years ago, misdemeanor defendants were generally being sent to be treated in hopes that they could be restored to competency, and their criminal cases could move forward. With SB 317, that's no longer the case. Okay. They did this in an effort to reduce and eliminate their custody in jail. Under SB 317, the court has 4 options. Okay, if an individual remains incompetent to stand trial, that court can order that individual to mental health diversion through Office of Diversion and Reentry. They have an option to refer them to assisted outpatient treatment, or if that individual, if their mental health condition is so severe, the court may order the public guardian to conduct an investigation for suitability of conservatorship, okay? The court also has discretionary authority to dismiss that case entirely. All right, next slide. So those are your misdemeanors. For your felonies, the felony incompetence to stand trial, again, there's a declaration of doubt. The criminal court or the criminal proceeding comes to a halt. That case is referred to our mental health court. At our mental health court, our felony incompetence to stand trial may still be committed to restoration training, okay? Meaning that that individual will likely be committed to 2 years of restoration training for a total of 2 years. However, depending on where that restoration training is being held, generally it used to be at the Department of State hospitals, but because there was a long wait list to get them into the Department of State hospitals, there's other options available now for restoration training. There's jail-based restoration training. There's Department of State hospitals diversion and community-based restoration that here in LA County is managed by Office of Diversion and Reentry. Okay. Although the law allows for up to 2 years of restoration training, at any time, those mental health professionals that are providing that restoration training can report back to the court that it is unlikely that a defendant can be restored to competency in order for their criminal case to move forward. Okay, once that finding is made, then the court will likely order the public guardian again to conduct an investigation for suitability of LPS conservatorship. Okay. Next slide. Okay. The CARE Act. Okay, this is the Community Assistance, Recovery, and Empowerment, Act. Again, this is what's going to establish the CARE Court, right? The law that was enacted is SB 1338. It is a new approach to act earlier and to provide support and accountability both to the individuals with untreated serious mental health illness and to local governments with responsibility to provide behavioral health services. Okay. The CARE Court will likely be held in along with our LPS court in the Norwalk courthouse. From our understanding, that is where Superior Court is planning on establishing the courts that will handle the CARE Court. Okay. Initially, there was 2 cohorts. The first cohort that was responsible for rolling out CARE Court was gonna the deadline for that was gonna be October 1st of this year. However, as I indicated earlier, Los Angeles County has now been made part of the first cohort, and we are mandated to establish CARE Court here in LA County prior to the end of 2023. Okay. All right. So again, CARE Court is something that's going to happen prior to a person being referred for conservatorship. This is another alternative to conservatorship that may result in that individual being ordered into treatment by the court prior to there being a need for them to be conserved. Okay. Next slide. Again, CARE Court adds another option to the court. The criteria for CARE Court will be that an individual be 18 years or older, suffers from a serious mental illness, and has a current diagnosis of within the schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorders. That individual is not clinically stabilized in ongoing treatment. And one of the following remains true. It is unlikely that that individual can survive safely in the community without supervision, and condition is substantially deteriorating. Okay. That individual is in need of services and supports to prevent relapse or deterioration that would result in that individual being gravely disabled or serious harm to self or others. Okay. Participation in the care plan or care agreement would be the least restrictive option necessary to ensure recovery and stability. All right. That the person is likely to benefit from participation in the care plan or care agreement. All right. Next slide. Okay. Petitions in CARE Court will be filed where the county respondent resides, where respondent is found case to be transferred to where respondent actually resides, okay? So residency is going to be key here, okay? And it can also be filed where the respondent is facing criminal or civil proceedings. So who can petition for care court? Okay. And again, this is something that opens up another option for community services or for loved ones. Okay. The person with whom the respondent resides, a spouse, parent, sibling, grandparent, or other individual who stands as a guardian to the respondent. Okay. So a director of a hospital can apply for care court on behalf of an individual. The director of public or charitable organizations, agencies, homes, who has within 30 days provided or is currently providing behavioral health services, or an institution where the respondent resides. A licensed behavioral health professional who is or has been within previous 30 days supervising or treating the respondent who is suffering from a mental illness. A first responder, a peace officer, firefighter, paramedic, EMT, emergency mobile crisis response team member, homeless outreach workers, all these individuals will have the ability to file in care court for an individual, okay? The public guardian or private or public conservator of the respondent can also file for care court on behalf of somebody. The director of the county behavioral health agency, the director of adult protective services, director of California Health Services Program, California tribal behavioral health departments, a judge or a tribal court in California, and the respondent themselves, okay? So again, it opens up another option for individuals who have provided services or live with an individual who suffered from mental illness, okay? So again, it creates a lot more, another opportunity for family, loved ones, treating doctors to seek the court's assistance to set a standard by which an individual needs to follow court mandates and comply with treatment, okay? Next slide. The care court petition must include facts that support the petitioner's allegations that the respondent meets care criteria, and one of these two are met, okay? An affidavit by the licensed behavioral health professional who has examined the respondent within 60 days or has made multiple attempts to examine and determine respondent meets diagnostic criteria, okay? They also need to show that evidence respondent was detained a minimum of 2 5250s with most recent within the previous 60 days. All right. So again, a lot of cases that we see that come through for conservatorship, these individuals may have had 8, 9, 10 involuntary hold periods prior to a hospital referring them for conservatorship. With care court, all you're going to need to show is that they've been on 2 involuntary holds within 60 days. Okay. Next slide. So the respondent's due process elements, there's a notice of petition. So the individual does get an official notice that there's a petition pending with the care court. They receive a copy of the evaluation. They also have a right to counsel. They can have a supporter of their choice that advocates on their behalf. A right to be present at court unless presence is waived. They also have a right to present evidence to show that they should not be under the supervision of the care court. They'll have the right to call witnesses and cross-examine witnesses, and they have a right to appeal the court's decision. All right. Next slide. There's a voluntary reappointment and an involuntary reappointment. Okay, the conditions for involuntary reappointment: the individual did not successfully complete the plan or the program as mandated by the court. Okay, all required services and supports were provided timely. There was clear and convincing evidence the respondent meets criteria for care court program. The respondent would benefit from continuing in the care court. Okay, so those are all elements that need to be proven in order for the case to be reappointed under the care court. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Care court plan elements. So the care court, once somebody's under the supervision of the care court, there's certain elements that need to be met. All right. That their behavioral health services, mental health services, and substance abuse disorder services are available for that individual. That housing resources are offered. That social services are available. And it may include medically necessary stabilization medications. The court may authorize administration of medication if all of the following apply. Okay. The individual lacks capacity to give informed consent. The individual requires appropriate medication as demonstrated by and evident by presented by the licensed physician or psychologist. The court ordered medication shall not be forcibly administered and absent a separate court order. Okay. Services and supports ordered by the court are subject to available funding, statutes, regulations, contractual provisions, policies, and eligibility. Okay. So generally, these are the elements that the county behavioral health programs will be required to provide to those individuals that are under the supervision of the care court. Okay, next slide. Okay, the role of the supporter. Okay, so again, that a trained supporter can be provided to that individual and is no longer provided by the state. The respondent can include a volunteer supporter. Okay. The state shall provide training to volunteer supporters, and the supporter role will offer respondent flexible, cultural, responsive ways to maintain autonomy, decision-making authority over their own life. Okay. The supporter will strengthen will assist in strengthening the respondent's capacity to engage and exercise decision-making authority over themselves. They will assist the respondent with understanding, making, and communicating decisions and preferences. The supporter may be present in meetings, judicial proceedings, in order to help with the development of plans and psychiatric advance directives. The supporter cannot make decisions on behalf of the respondent. And they also cannot be subpoenaed or called to testify. Okay, the accountability. The respondent not participating or failing to comply with care plans, the court can terminate the participation in the care program. Failure to successfully complete the care plan may be a fact considered by the court in any subsequent hearings under LPS or writ conservatorship hearings. Meaning, if an individual fails at a care court, that's another element by which us, in an effort to establish an LPS conservatorship, can show the court that this option was already tried and failed on behalf of that client, okay? If the court finds that the county is not complying with court orders, a fine of up to $1,000 per day, not exceeding $25,000 per client, can be subjected to the counties. All right. And if there's repeated non-compliance, the court can appoint a receiver to secure treatment at the county's cost. All right. So there's not only accountability on the patient themselves, there's a level of accountability that's imposed on the county as well. Okay. All right. Next slide. Okay. So to conclude, the mental health court, which used to formerly be at Hollywood Courthouse, as indicated earlier, the Hollywood Courthouse is now only hearing the competency cases for criminal justice involved clients. Department 103 is now Department A as in Apple. And as Gail mentioned earlier, that LPS courtroom is now run out of the Norwalk Courthouse, okay? All right. The Norwalk Courthouse started operations as of January 1st, and the bench officer currently hearing our LPS cases is Judge Heron. And as mentioned earlier, we anticipate that when Care Court comes on board at the end of this year, that Care Court will also be held at the Norwalk Courthouse as well. Okay. All right. Last slide, Araceli. So here's our contact information for the Public Guardian's Office. So feel free, if anybody has any questions related to the conservatorship process, feel free to give us a call. We have supervisors that are on duty during normal work hours that can answer whatever questions you may have related to the LPS conservatorship process. Okay. Thank you all for allowing us to provide you with this information. And again, any questions, feel free to give us a call. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So Linda is going to, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but Linda's going to now present the case for AOT.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure being here. Next slide, please. So AOT, otherwise known as, let me say a couple of things first. One is that what I'm going to talk about will sound very familiar because you've heard many of the same pieces of it in Care Court. Care Court has a large basis in what was developed for the assisted outpatient treatment program. So many of the pieces of it are the same. The other thing, let me just go back to SB 317 for a second, because, and Luis did an outstanding job, both with, well, of course, with conservatorship, but also both with SB 317 and Care Court. The other thing that's important to know about SB 317 is that prior to its becoming effective January 1st, 2022, if someone was declared what we call missed, a misdemeanor incompetent to stand trial, the court could order involuntary medication. And if the client didn't comply with treatment, they could be remanded back to custody. With SB 317, the mandatory medication, involuntary mandatory medication was taken out of the law. So there is no more mandatory involuntary medication for folks who are declared misdemeanor incompetent to stand trial. They are offered to accept mental health diversion through the Office of Diversion and Reentry. If they refuse, or if they have gone to ODR in the past and they've AWOL'd, ODR does not take them back because they have a limited number of beds. And so if someone has failed out of it, generally, they don't accept them back. And then the judge they all tend to refer together. They tend to refer on the suitability of AOT and grave disability. So while I'm looking to see if they're suitable for the assisted outpatient treatment program, either the care transition folks in custody, or I think probably Luis's shop is for out of custody missed clients, is determining whether or not they meet grave disability, while I'm assessing if they meet AOT criteria. If they don't meet AOT criteria and they are not gravely disabled, the cases are dismissed. And often when they're accepted into AOT treatment, the cases are dismissed. So there are clients who are declared misdemeanor incompetent to stand trial, who say no to Office of Reentry, who do not qualify for AOT, they don't meet the statutory requirements, and they are not gravely disabled. So their cases are dismissed and there is no mental health treatment involved. So I just wanted to, that's sort of the piece of SB 317 that's totally different than the way it was prior to January 1st, 2022. So having said that, assisted outpatient treatment, also known as Laura's Law, was established following the killing of Laura Wilcox, who was an intern who would intern on her breaks at a mental health clinic in Nevada County, California, which is a small county in Northern California. She was on her winter break volunteering at the interning at the mental health clinic, and someone who was non-compliant with treatment came in, killed Laura, injured someone else, went to a restaurant, killed someone, and injured someone there as well. And so her parents fought for the establishment of some sort of treatment for folks who are normally non-compliant with treatment. And so in 2002, Helen Thompson put forth Assembly Bill 1421, which did a lot of things, but one of the things it did with respect to Laura's Law is it established a demonstration project. Next slide, please. What Laura's Law, or AOT, does, it allows the Department of Mental Health to interact and to serve seriously mentally ill folks who are at risk of deterioration and who will possibly be 5150 as a result of poor compliance with mental health treatment. And so all AOT eligible individuals are outreached to and we want to engage them either in a full service partnership, and what LA County has that not all the county has is that we also have some beds with our enriched residential services program, which are known in other places as IMD step downs. Next slide, please. So if a client refuses services, AOT may petition the court to order them into psychiatric outpatient treatment. And so what AOT did is expanded our interagency collaboration. We've had court linkage in the courts in LA for years and years and years, but we haven't, and they usually collaborated with the public defenders, but not necessarily the district attorneys. Now we're collaborating with county council, public defender, patients' rights. We've always collaborated with law enforcement, but even more so now. Next slide, please. So this criteria is going to look very similar to what you just heard about care courts. So these are the eligibility, and we call the clients who are being referred for services, we call them candidates. They must be 18 years of older. They must suffer from a serious mental illness. And the difference is with care court, it has to be someone, the illness has to be on the schizophrenia spectrum or a psychotic disorder. With AOT, it can be any psychiatric disorder that's outlined in the DSM, in the latest edition of the DSM, which is the DSM-5. So bipolar disorder, major depression, PTSD, Those are serious mental illnesses that would qualify for AOT, and they may not qualify for care court. And for AOT, they have to have a history of non-compliance with treatment. And those are evidenced by either 2 hospitalizations in the last 36 months, or it can be 2 forensic incarcerations like at Twin Towers. So being arrested by the local jail does not count in terms of the forensic incarcerations. And we hear that a lot because often your loved ones are arrested and they might be taken to LAPD 77th station or Arcadia PD or Beverly Hills PD, anywhere. They're taken, they're kept at the local station, and they're released either on their own recognizance, or they go to court and they're released from court. That incarceration does not count as an incarceration for AOT. It must be a forensic incarceration, which means they've had mental health treatment while they are in custody. So for us, generally, it's Twin Towers. And for females, there are sections of CRDF that do provide mental health treatment. And so either 2 hospitalizations or 2 forensic incarcerations, or 1 of each in the last 36 months, or a threat or attempt to cause serious physical harm to either themselves or to someone else in the last 48 months. And when I say 36 months and 48 months, I don't, the reason I don't say 3 years and 4 years is because, for instance, someone who was hospitalized in January of 2020, now it's February of 2023, so they have that January hospitalization has fallen off. It's the actual months. And so that's why it's considered 36 for the hospitalizations and incarcerations, and 48 for the threats. They must be substantially deteriorating. They have behaviors that are likely to result in grave disability or in serious harm to themselves or others without treatment. They have failed to engage in any available treatment, and AOT must be the least restrictive setting, and they must be able to benefit from AOT. The next slide, please. What we provide is extensive outreach and engagement for a minimum of 30 days. That includes screening and assessment. If the client says yes, then we will connect them to a full service partnership and they'll remain voluntarily into the AOT program. If the client says no, and we know they're going to relapse without AOT, or they are continuing to deteriorate, then we petition the court to mandate treatment. And then once the court has ordered the treatment, then we have progress hearings in the court. And the court, again, is the same court as the conservatorship court and will be the same court as the care courts, which is the Hollywood Court, Department A on the 2nd floor of the Hollywood Courthouse in the Norwalk Courthouse, Department A in Norwalk Courthouse. Next slide, please. So who can refer? And this list is going to look very familiar to you as well. A cohabitant, someone over the age of 18, a roommate, a domestic partner, a close relative, a parent, a sibling, a spouse, an adult child over the age of 18. And the care court lists grandparent. If the grandparent is the person, we sort of treat it the same way. If it's an aunt or a grandparent or a cousin, and they are the person acting instead of the parent, they are the person who has the relationship and is providing care or knows the client the best, we will accept referrals from them. The director of a residential care facility or a hospital director or their designee, licensed mental health provider, a peace officer, parole officer, probation officer, and as of, I need to update the slide, as of July 2021, a superior court judge may also refer. So you can see this list, the care court list closely resembles who can refer to AOT. Next slide, please. So this is the process. And so if you'll look in the upper right-hand corner, we receive the AOT referral. And then my staff gather information. We look at the referral, and the referral covers the now 7 elements of the requirements for AOT. And then we substantiate the hospitalizations or the threats. We'll call the referring party. And if the referring party is a mobile crisis team, our PM, our psychiatric mobile crisis response teams, or a police officer, if there's family or anyone else, we will also call them to gather as much information as we can to determine the criteria. And then we have a referral meeting that gets together every Tuesday afternoon, and we go over cases. And then if they meet the criteria, then my staff goes out and we start aggressively outreaching to that client. Again, if they say yes, we refer them to a full service partnership, sometimes to an enriched residential services program. If they refuse and they're deteriorating, we will petition the Norwalk Courthouse to mandate treatment. And then if the judge orders if the petition is sustained, then we refer them to the full service partnership or the ERS, and services begin. If the petition is not granted, if the petition is denied, then we have to stop all services, because unless the client volunteers, and generally they're not volunteering, which is why we're bringing them to court to begin with, then we have no legal ability to continue to outreach to them. Next slide, please. So this is the petition process. And so once we've determined, the outreach team has determined that the client is not going to comply with any treatment and that they cannot survive safely in the community without some assistance, our psychologist generally goes out to see that client, to evaluate that client, and then at the same time offers that client a treatment plan. Then within 10 days, she writes the declaration outlining the how this client meets, or how the candidate meets, the AOT criteria. We submit that declaration to County Council. County Council draws up a petition and sends it to our director, our interim director is Lisa Wong, who's now personally signing all of those petitions. That petition gets sent back to our County Council, who files it with the Norwalk Courthouse. And within 5 days of the filing, a hearing is set. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a couple of things that happen. So when we're looking at the referral, there's some questions that my staff are going to ask. And so because just like with care court and even with conservatorship, in all of these court proceedings, the client has representation. So for us and for conservatorship, it's the public defender. It may be a little different with care court. It may be they're looking at different entities similar to legal aid. So it may not necessarily be the public defender, but the client will be represented. So with AOT, it's the public defender. So when our psychologist says the family reports that the client hasn't eaten, that is considered hearsay. So when we say the client has been hospitalized, we have to show that the client has been hospitalized. For us, in our electronic records, if a client has Medi-Cal, the hospitalization should show up in our records. We also read all of the notes in our records, because if our PMRT has hospitalized that client, or if one of our law enforcement teams, the MET team, SMOT team, HOPE teams, if any of them have hospitalized the client, the clinicians record that into the department's electronic records. So we read those notes, and those business records can be entered as proof of showing the hospitalizations. If the client has private insurance, if the client has Medicare and Medi-Cal, those do not show up in our treatment overview. So if the police have come, for instance, and they've hospitalized your loved one, and they took that person to Charter Oak, or to Del Amo, or to White Memorial, or to any hospital other than a county hospital, that hospitalization will not show up in our records. And so we will ask you for something, a discharge summary, anything that you have that shows that the client has been hospitalized. because anything that happens outside of the courtroom, unless the person testifying has to have firsthand knowledge. They had to have been there at the time. The other time, so then also if there's been a threat or an attempt to harm themselves or someone else, we will need to have that person testify in the hearing. That's relatively new for us. That's only been for about the past, it's going on 3 years now, because the public defender we had for the first 5 years of the program didn't ever call the Sanchez rule or the hearsay rule. But now when we say the parent, the mother reports that the client pushed her, that's secondhand information because we're getting it from you. So the court needs to hear from you that the client pushed. We're very aware that families may have some difficulty in testifying. And if it's going to create a risk to you, or if it's going to breach the relationship, we have had our county counsel will talk to you over the phone. We'll write up your testimony, we'll present it to the public defender. Public defender will read it. She may talk to you to see, just to sort of vet it. And she said, oh, okay, I know this parent's telling me the truth. We can present that in writing to the judge so that the testimony is entered into the court record, but it is not given live so that the client does not hear any of that testimony. We have done that with some cases in the past. And remember, if you are asked to testify, it's all in order to get treatment for your loved one, for the person that you care and that you're working so hard to get treatment for. Once the petition is filed, the public defender does go out to see every client before the hearing. She talks to the client, and if the client says what sometimes feels to me like they look at us and say, can't you take a joke? And they say to the public defender, oh, of course we'll get treatment. Then that client signs what is called a settlement agreement, which means that they will be a part of the court process. They'll be under the court's purview. However, there will not be a hearing. They've said, I agree to the facts and I agree to get treatment. So they may sign a settlement agreement, which we turn into the judge, and the petition is granted. Or if the client says, I don't want this treatment under any circumstances, then a hearing takes place. And so our county counsel, it's a regular hearing, just as it is in conservatorship court, just as it's going to be in care court. County counsel swears in our psychologist. She testifies to the facts of how they meet AOT criteria. If there's another witness, a family member, then that person is sworn in and testifies, and the public defender can cross-examine. And then if the client wants to testify, then they're sworn in, and the public defender asks questions, and the county counsel can cross-examine, and then the judge rules. I can say particularly with this new judge, so AOT has always been a collaborative court. With this public defender, because we have public defenders that have changed over time. The last public defender we had, this public defender, are very collaborative. The judge is, we've only had him for a month, so I don't want to speak too soon, but he feels wonderful. He talks to the clients, he engages our clients. He's really interested in their well-being. It's a very collaborative process. And so when a client is doing well, they get praised by everyone, by the judge, by the public defender, by county counsel, by myself. We all chime in and praise the client for what's going on and what they're doing well. And if the client's not doing well, the judge encourages them to do well. So the judge may order medication. The same with care court. There is no involuntary medication. So sometimes the Black, with AOT, it is dependent upon the Black robe. If people respect the law, if people respect judges, it can work wonderfully well. if people don't respect law so much and they don't respect the black robe so much, it can not work at all, to be very honest. So we've had some wonderful, wonderful successes, and we've had some where we've not been able to make a dent, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So with AOT, the order, this is if the petition sustained. AOT is ordered in 6-month increments, 180 days. So we have progress reports. So if the client's not doing well, and we're kind of back to this process, we had this process for years and then it stopped and now we're back. So if a client is not doing well and needs more encouragement, we're going to bring them back more quickly. We can with some clients right now, we're bringing back weekly, so that they get to understand that we are serious and yet that it is supportive. And then as clients do better, we move their progress reports out a little more. By law, they have to have a progress report a minimum of every 60 days, but we're seeing them much more often than that. And again, as I've said, there is no forced medication. So right now we're on WebEx, and in July of 2022, it was written into the law that they can stay. Because WebEx became because of COVID. Prior to that, everyone was in person, and now it's written into the AOT law that folks have a choice about whether they want to come into court or whether they want to appear by WebEx. We do have clients who do come into court, and we do have clients. The majority of our clients are on WebEx. And if they're in treatment, so once they're petitioned and they're in treatment, the provider also comes on. They submit a written report during the week. Our hearings are every Friday, are on Friday, our court dates. So by Wednesday morning, we're submitting all of the written progress reports for that week, to the court. And then the court files them. The judge reads all of the progress reports. And then the provider and the client appear in court via WebEx or in person on Friday, the week of their hearing. Next slide, please. So again, once petitioned, the client is assigned to a full service partnership or an ERS. So the two things that we have that Care Court doesn't have. Care Court, the person, if they're not complying at all, they can be referred for an evaluation for conservatorship. If for AOT, if a person doesn't so our psychologist goes out to examine the person, and it's not a whole psychiatric assessment. She spends enough time with the client to determine if they have a mental illness, and if she can observe and talk to them and observe some of the symptoms of their mental illness to be able to establish those things and then how they are deteriorating. If the client will not submit to an examination, then the court will order another examination. If the client does not submit to that, we have the ability with a 5346D3 to have the court order the client to be hospitalized to a psychiatric hospital for the hospital to determine if the person meets criteria or not. The other is that once the person is court ordered to treatment, if the person is not complying with that treatment and they're deteriorating, we can ask for 5346F, which the statute allows us to hospitalize that client as well with the court order to be evaluated and treated. So a 5346, the person does not have to meet 5150 criteria in order for us to petition for them to be hospitalized. Often our clients do meet 5150 criteria, so we're writing the 5346 order as well as writing a 5150. But the other thing it allows is it allows police, it's written into the court order that police can assist us. And for those of you who are in LA County and you've had our PMRT come out and they say, the person does need to go to the hospital and they're not going to get on the gurney, and we ask for police assistance, that oftentimes police are not assisting us with getting the person onto the gurney and everyone walks away. So this court order does allow for police to be able to to assist us put their hands on to put the person on the gurney. That doesn't mean a use of force. It doesn't mean any extraordinary measures. But it does allow them, because I know you know that it's been getting harder for police to assist with getting someone on the gurney. At the end of the 6 months, the person, if they still need an additional time, we will repetition for an additional 6 months. So the petition can be extended in 6-month periods, and each time we repetition. We have one lady who's been on for 2 years, and she refuses to come indoors. She's homeless, but she is accepting injectable medication, and that is helping with her symptoms and is keeping her safer than she would be without any medication. And that's one of the reasons. And so when we're talking about baby steps, we're talking sometimes about very, very small steps. But having someone come on WebEx when they would not appear at all is a huge accomplishment for us. So we do talk about baby steps. The statute does allow, if someone does not want to appear, it does allow for us to hold the hearing without them. We try not to do that because it's not as effective. And so, and with the public defender going out to see them before their petition, she talks about them being their lawyer, and she will help them, and really does try to get the folks to come to court. Our biggest issues are, of course, many of our clients, the majority of our clients don't feel like they have a mental illness. And the other biggest issue we have are the folks who have a very big substance abuse issue. And sometimes their addiction is so great that it just prevents them from being able to accept any form of substance abuse treatment, so that we can even begin to get to the mental illness. And there is no involuntary substance abuse treatment in the state of California. Our judge will order residential substance abuse. I mean, we haven't tried it with the new judge, but our judge in the past has ordered that, understanding that the client has to say yes. And we've had clients who were hospitalized and the judge ordered residential treatment, and they said, well, if the judge ordered it, I should do it. I must do it. And they've done it. We also have ordered residential eating disorder placement for a client who was severely ill with an eating disorder. Next slide, please. And so let me just go back to you don't have to change slides, but let me go back to the graduation for a minute, because at the end, especially before COVID, it's been a little different now, but before COVID, when clients were always coming into court for graduation, we would give a certificate, a $25 Target gift card. We would bring in cupcakes or cakes of the client's favorite flavor. The judge would come off the bench and shake hands and give them the card. Everyone would sign it. Everyone in court would cheer and clap. It was a big deal. Since COVID, if the person's on WebEx, we cheer and clap. We can try and mail them the gift card. It doesn't have quite the same as having a person there, but we even, had someone who appeared on camera for the first time, and we were cheering and clapping because the person appeared. So it is very, very, very supportive, particularly with this judge. And so just where AOT fits, and I don't know that we need to go through all of this, but, as Luis had mentioned, conservatorship is the most restrictive level of care, and the care just under that is AOT. I have to say, everything we have in AOT is unlocked. We have no locked treatment. So our ERSs are unlocked. Boarding care homes, sober living, any place the client stays is unlocked. The other with our enriched residential services, or the IMD step downs, as some of you know them as, the person has to say yes. And the same with all of our housing. So our full service partnerships can find housing for folks. The person has to say yes. which has been difficult for many of our clients. Many of our unhoused clients don't feel safe in any kind of congregate living situation. So for some very, very valid reasons. And so clients have to say yes to an ERS. They have to say yes to any housing. They do not have to say yes to an FSP. The court order is in lieu of consent. So the outreach teams as well as the FSPs are going to go out to see that client even when the client says, don't come, I told you not to come. We do offer all of those things, but housing, the person has to say yes. And the only way not to have them have to say yes is to having them be conserved. Next slide, please. So the benefits and the goals of AOT, it is a civil mandate. Someone does not have to have been arrested or been in custody in order to qualify for AOT. Many of our clients, unfortunately, have been, or our candidates have been, but that's not a requirement. So we also have many candidates who've never been arrested. We monitor the client for compliance and treatment. It decreases violence and crime and the criminalization of our folks, and I do call them our folks. And history is relevant. And so the thing about AOT is that it is considering their history. The history is what, and their present, along with their present behavior, is what determines the ability to have the petition sustained. And we can act when someone is, and it's kind of what I call is 5149, but not quite 5150. So we can intervene and send someone to a hospital before they get so seriously ill that they've put themselves or others at risk, either with grave disability or with being a danger to themselves or to someone else. Next slide, please. And so when you're just looking about where we fit, so if a consumer, if there's a crisis, a 911 call, a PMRT call, and then in the gray area, you'll see folks who are treatment compliant. And so this brings up another point. So families and mental health providers and other folks call us or send in a referral, and they'll say, you know, the client is seeing a therapist and they're seeing a case manager and they're refusing medication. And we just want them to do something else because we really need them to take their medication. Well, they are complying with treatment. So that even though, and since AOT can't mandate medication, they are complying with treatment and they will not qualify by statute for AOT. So someone is enrolled in a full service partnership and they've told the full service partnership staff to pound sand. They won't meet with the therapist anymore. They won't meet with the case manager. They've never met with the psychiatrist. Those folks will qualify for AOT, or they're not in any services at all. They will qualify for AOT. So it's those in between where they are accepting some treatment, even though it's not everything we would like for them to have, that kind of gray area where they are not likely to qualify for AOT. And the folks who are non-compliant, that lighter blue area, the folks who are non-compliant with treatment, who even though they have treatment, a psychiatrist, a therapist, any of those things, they're still not complying with anybody, or they've refused all treatment and haven't been to treatment in a very long time. Those folks will qualify for AOT. Next slide, please. And so the AOTLAOE@DMH is the email. Let me give you my cell number is 213-216-8808. And our AOT email is also our fax line. So next slide, please. And our general line, I'm sorry, go back a second. Our general line still is 213-738-2440. That is our general AOT line. Next slide, please. And so I guess at this point, we can open it up for questions for everybody. My number is 213-216-8808.
Okay, yes. So people can raise their hand, they can turn on their cameras, unmute. We're here still for like another 15 minutes. So please, any questions are welcome. And Jim and Gail, you're both muted right now. Okay.
Okay. Linda, I just have to say, I like that you and Lewis, you two, y'all are calling the people folks, candidates, and clients versus consumers. I've always hated that term consumers. I felt like it was a parasite. But this is so much, it elevates it so much nicer. I'm glad you all do that. I do have curiosity on the AOT program. How many clients do y'all have? And what is your success rate?
We have 300 AOT slots for FSP. And last year, Dr. Sharon transformed the full service partnership. So some of our clients are in regular AOT, regular FSP programs. The other thing I didn't mention is that AOT by statute has a higher ratio, that it is 10 clients per staff, as opposed to the regular FSP, which can be 15 or 20 clients to staff ratio. So most of our clients, we average about 100 petitioned clients out of the 300 or so. Our petitions have been going down, I think, because of the public defenders we had in the past. So I have a feeling it's going to be increasing again. We've gotten lots of, probably now, like 180 SB 317 referrals. About 36% of those meet criteria. So a lot of the referrals we're getting from SB 317 don't have any mental health history, or they haven't been hospitalized.